Hey folks, Rob here bringing another tutorial. So I got a request to do Chapter F from a viewer, and this is going to be Chapter F North Africa we're going to cover. Now we're going to be doing this in 3 videos. This first one we're just going to cover the introduction of what to expect in North Africa, the intro part of Chapter F itself where they talk about some preliminaries, and then we're going to cover minefields. And then we're going to do part 2, which is going to be actual dust and sun blindness heat haze. That's going to be a lot of rules to cover, so we're going to do that in part 2. And then part 3, we're actually going to go over the different terrain that you're going to see, as well as some tactics and stuff. So those 2 parts will be coming up in the future. And a couple of articles that I reference in this, and I highly recommend you get. One is an annual ASL annual number or 89. It's a first-person narrative article. It's about 3 pages long, written by Mark Nixon. It's really well thought of in the ASL community, from what I understand, and it's referenced repeatedly on Game Squad forum. It's called "Gunned Up in the Desert," and it's like I said, it's a first-person narrative about desert rules from the perspective of somebody in the Africa Corps. I haven't read it myself, but it's really well thought of apparently. So it's a good introduction to the desert rules, written back in 1989. So it might be a little bit dated, but it's still pretty good. There's also Up and Down in the Desert. Now that is a view from the trenches. That is a British fanzine, if you will. It's perfectly free. You're going to see the link down in the description, so I recommend you go there. They're up to issue, I think it's 126 right now, so they've been going for a while. They have a good article, several pages, and they actually have two tables, which I'm surprised that they don't have them in the MMP rulebook. The first one you're going to see there is Table 1 Dust Summary. Nicely summarizes the dust rules, which we're going to heavily reference when we get to part 2. And it summarizes the dust rules, which could really play havoc with your die rolls. You're going to see that when we get to that part. And the second table is heat haze, I believe, which again is going to really play havoc with your dice rolls. It's really going to be interesting to see when we get to that part and how that plays with you. And then lastly, we're going to look at dispatches from the bunker. This is a series of 3 articles. The third one isn't out yet. It's coming in issue number 59, which I believe they're going to be releasing. Well, it should be soon. I can't wait to get my hands on that. And this is from Vic Provost. He's the editor. And it's the Northeast ASL group from, I think, Boston or some Northeast US. It is a subscription service. You're going to have to pay for that. You can get the link down below, and it's going to be from the Game Squad forum site. From there, you can contact Vic Provost, and through PayPal, you can pay for these services. About $60 US for all the back issues. As I said, it goes all the way to like the mid to late 90s, and quite a lot. There's over 200 scenarios. 58 current issues, and there's going to be another 4 in the offing coming soon. And I think it's 20 for those 4 issues and 60 for all the back issues, something like that. So it's a lot of ASL goodness for your dollars. So it's really well thought of again from the ASL community. And lastly is the hassle that I mentioned previously. It's coming out. I'm not sure when. Right now it's being play tested. It's on Kurt Schilling's Discord server. You can see it there. It's going to be Fox and the Rat, I think it's called. Fox versus the Rat, something like that. And it's dealing with, I believe, Tobruk, the siege. And it is desert themed. So it's going to include several things like the hassle itself, scenarios, as well as a primer on programmed instruction you can see there from Kurt Schilling from MMP on how to play in the desert. So a lot of goodness coming to you, coming your way. And I can't wait to get that hassle in my hands. All right, so let's get into it and what are we going to expect in the desert. So what are you going to expect? So MMP has 7 map boards for the desert. You're going to see 6 that are flat, and you can see the terrain right there, perfectly flat. Now there are a shitload of overlays. A lot of them are wadis. There's going to be sand, hamada, hillocks, a lot of counters as well. And there is the one hill board you can see at the top left with the nice winding switchback road and a couple of stone overlays as well. LFT, La Franc-Tireur, has magazine number 15, which comes with 8 more desert boards as well. You got the 7 right there, and then they have one that's a combination European desert theme. So it's got a European hill mass with desert theme low ground, so you can match the two. It's quite nice, which I didn't put on here, but you can see that their terrain varies a lot. So you have forested regions, you have valleys, you have a lot more scrub and bush and hill masses, as well as little villages you can see there. So a lot more varied terrain than the MMP ones. Now, they also have magazine issue number 14, which expands on the Italians because the MMP Italians are relatively weak. So you have more squad types, and you got a lot more history from the magazine as well. So if you really want to bone up on your Italians, I highly recommend issue number 14. And between 14 and 15, you get a lot more desert action as well. So again, highly recommend LFT 14 and 15. When it comes to the desert, again, you have a lot of overlays, and any desert overlay rules apply just as if it was a desert board. So just because you have a stone building or sand overlay, just remember all the rules apply to the overlays, even if it may not be desert colors, as it were. Dust, you're going to have huge impact on your game. Typically, dust does not work like mist does. Mist typically is for the first 6 hexes, it may be clear, and then every group of 6 hexes, you have a modifier +1, +2, etc. With dust, for the first 2 types, light and moderate, it's going to be a die roll. For light dust, it is a d6 halved rounded down, and for moderate, it's a d6 halved rounded up for every die roll. So every die roll is going to be different. You could have 0 to +3, or 0 to or 1 to +3, depending on the level of dust, and it goes worse from there. So you're also going to have a lot of different terrain that you can expect to see. You have Hamada, you have scrub, you have a lot more variety of terrain types, which you're going to have to adapt to and are definitely going to ruin your day. Broken ground is going to be interesting to work with. If you've never played desert before, it's going to be interesting. Wadis are basically like a gully, except they have some other restrictions, and they also have some benefits to them that a gully will not give you. Morale changes are another one that is going to be interesting. You're not going to have woods everywhere unless you use the LFT boards, or buildings everywhere that you're going to be able to run to and rally to. On the other hand, you're not going to have to worry about failure to route as much, because they have allowance for that, and because the warfare in the desert was a little more gentlemanly than it was in the European theater. Surrender is always an option, and again, failure to route is never, rarely is going to be implemented. Sun blindness and heat haze. There's going to be many attacks with the sun at your back, and if you're a defender, you're going to be staring into the sun while the tanks are coming at you. There's actually a renowned scenario, Blazing Chariots, which is just that, where the Germans are coming at you in tanks with dust behind them and the sun behind them, and you're staring at that while they try and flank you. So it's really interesting. And of course, heat haze. Now, I've never played one with heat haze, but it will be an issue as well. Again, we're going to cover that in one of the later parts. And then, of course, you also have the range. Because of the wide open field in front of you, you're going to be using those ranges to the right of the to-hit table. You rarely see in the European theater. It's just too dense. Typically, you have buildings and woods and hills. You don't get to use those really long ranges typically in most scenarios, barring the hassles that account for that. You're going to be using the area target type a lot, because once you get to that 25, 30 hex range, you're looking at the modifiers. You throw in dust, and it's just, and all those other modifiers, it's just going to be impossible to get vehicle and infantry target type, especially when you start using red to hit numbers. You're going to have to start using area more and more, and you're just going to have to live with having it on the effects die roll. It's your only chance of really getting any kind of impact from your guns is using the area target type. And you're going to have to change your mindset when you play desert as well. On the attack, you're going to have to figure out how do you move in the open, knowing that you're going to get shot to shit. You're going to have to use the sun and dust to your benefit. You're going to have to create your own dust, moving your vehicles in such a fashion to screen your forces. You're going to have to use smoke more. If you've never used smoke a lot, you're definitely going to have to use a lot more smoke in your OBA, especially smoke rounds in your ordnance and all that, just to cover your attack. On the defense, you're not going to have a lot of emplacements and hip guns because there's nowhere to hide. So you're going to have dummy stacks to fool your opponent into thinking that might be a gun emplacement. You may have to trade in some of your OB concealment counters for 5/8 dummy counters and that kind of thing, just to throw them off. You're going to have to figure out where's your fallback and rally points because you're not going to have very many. You're going to have to think differently, and you're going to have to adjust according to the terrain that's around you. You're going to have to spread out a lot more as well because it's so wide open, and because of your limited defensive capabilities, you're going to get hammered with OBA a lot, and you're really going to be vulnerable. So you're going to have to think differently than you would normally in a European theater. All right, so let's look at the actual Chapter F introductory parts. EC is going to play a huge part, as we said, and of course, dust is going to be significant in most desert scenarios. You're going to have bombardments dust, you're going to have OBA dust, vehicle dust. Early morning mist may be playing in there as well. So it's definitely going to be an issue. And again, we're going to cover that later on. As we said, emplacement is very difficult because there's not much concealment terrain that you're going to find. And guns can only be emplaced in concealment terrain only if you're not playing with broken and step terrain. So if those two terrain types are in effect, broken and step terrain, which again we'll cover later on, you cannot emplace anyways. So you need concealment terrain, you need sand, and you need trenches, or I should say you need one of those three types: concealment terrain, sand, or trenches. And you cannot have broken or step terrain. Now with sand, it's benefits and detriments. Sand will only give you a +1 emplacement, not the typical +2. However, it is also very cushioning when it comes to HE attacks. It will reduce their effectiveness a little bit. Again, we're going to cover that when we get to the terrain, so don't worry about that for now. Entrenching attempts in general in the desert are very difficult because typically under the sand there's harder rock, and most entrenchments are not dug down, they're actually built up. That's where sangers, and again we'll cover that later on, come in. They're built up defensive positions. If you ever dug into hard rock, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You build up, you don't dig down. And therefore, it's harder to dig in. You get the +2 unless you're digging into sand or, again, step terrain. When it comes to map boards that are part desert and non-desert, and you have those half hexes, they only count as desert terrain if it's a wadi, and or if it's accessible to hamada or sand. And then when it comes to routing, note that there's lack of rally terrain. So you're only going to have buildings and I should mention, any buildings on a desert board are always stone. If you only have woods and or stone buildings as your rally terrain. And when it comes to routing itself, if it's a non-night scenario and you're using all desert boards and it's not broken or step terrain, you will not be eliminated for failure to route, provided no enemies within 6 hexes. So in this example here, you can see all the German units are farther than 6 hexes away. However, the unit with the LMG is within range of the within 8 hexes of the broken British unit. So normally, the British unit would be eliminated for failure to route. However, because of the desert rules, it is the unit itself is more than 6 hexes away. Therefore, the British unit will not be eliminated. It will stay perfectly where it is. It doesn't have to move. It can't move because it would be moving closer, so that still applies. It's just not eliminated for failure to route. And surrender may never be refused in desert scenarios. So just remember that. As long as it's a non-knight, as long as it's not broken and steppe terrain, surrender may never be refused, and failure to route, unless the enemy is within 6 hexes, is never an option. All right, further into the introductory chapter, Desert VP, which you can see on the desert scenario card, like here, bridgehead too wet. Printed in red on all the vehicles and guns is the Desert VP. Now, this is usually higher than your typical CVP for the vehicles and guns because they're valued higher in the desert. This is calculated to be 10% of the base point value, which you'll find in your Chapter H notes under the vehicle listing and the gun listings. And there it's calculated as 10% with, or it doesn't matter if it's a malfunction gun or not. And it does not account for the crew survival or not. So when, for example, that Valentine 5 with the circle there, if the crew fails to survive, you must calculate that separately for your CVP purposes. Now, some vehicles are enabled. You can dismount the main armament. For example, that SPW, you can dismount the mortar from it, or carriers, for example, or the American half tracks. You can dismount the heavies. You could the value of the vehicle will change accordingly if it gets subsequently destroyed. So if it's an AFV and the MA is removed, it gets reduced to a 2. All other vehicles get reduced to a 1. And again, just a reminder that desert victory point value is not including the PRC. So just bear that in mind. When it comes to Germans in North Africa, anything prior to October 41, German vehicles will have red MP allotments. They're subject to mechanical reliability. You can find that in D2.51. They just didn't have reliable engines prior to October 41. And anything in 42, 43, if you're going to design your own scenarios or your own games, 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, because of their loyalty to Rommel, should be considered elite units. All right, so looking at minefields now, because of the desert, they introduced 3 new kinds, although this is working their way into European theater and Pacific as well. Lone Canuck likes to use these as well, so they're making their way into other scenarios. And they are known minefields, known minefield lines, as well as dummy minefields. So a known minefield are clearly delineated, usually marked off with wire and whatnot. And there are special counters included for this. In Vassal, you'll see these all the time. They have blank on one side, and on the reverse, you have the actual firepower strength on the other side. These cannot be exchanged for booby traps or AT mines, unlike most minefield factors. Typically, in a normal game, minefield factors are not placed, counters aren't put on the board. It's typically recorded on the side record until at such point that somebody steps into one of those X's, and then you put the counter on the board. With these here, it's an actual dummy or a minefield counter blank on the board, and once it's activated, you can flip it over and reveal the actual strength. Now, when it comes to the minefield lines, these are, as you can see there, it uses 2 arrows pointing toward each other, much like a barrage arrow. So either down a hex row or alternating hex rows, like you can see there. And you just treated the same as a barrage line, and each hex along that line would have a same strength. Again, once the hex has been entered and an attack has been carried out, then the strength gets revealed. And then lastly, you got the dummy minefields, which is a series of blank minefields, again mixed up with actual mines, and you don't know until you enter that minefield whether it's a dummy or an actual mine. Now, the defender will always get 1 dummy counter per 24 known minefield factors, And you also get a secret die roll, which is half rounded down of additional dummy counters. So in any known minefield, you're always going to have a mix of dummies and real, and you don't know until you actually enter the minefield what's what. All right, so that was just a quick overview of what to expect in North Africa with some introduction to the Chapter F rules as well as minefields. And again, part 2 is going to cover the dust rules and the sun blindness. And then part 3, we're going to look into the actual terrain itself, and then we'll finish off with some tactics. And we'll see you guys in those videos. Bye-bye.